How to Survive as a Vampire by Immortal_Simo. Chapter 1. The Meeting. The sound of loud music still made his ears ring as he walked outside the club. The smell of cigarettes now clung deeply to his clothes, causing him to frown in disgust. His head felt heavy as he steadied himself against the wall.
Ooh.
The sound of someone emptying their stomach in the alley made him cringe inwardly.
I knew I shouldn't have come.
The young man grumbled in annoyance as he tried to shake away the dizziness. His fingers fumbled for his phone to check on his ride when a sudden breeze made him shiver subconsciously. His gaze moved back to the dim alley.
Hey, you good there, buddy?
He couldn't help but ask. The man, who had undoubtedly drunk too much, was now collapsed on the ground, unmoving. No response followed. Ethan glanced at his phone. The ride was still 10 minutes away. He sighed as he looked at the drunk man. He could see something red pooling on the ground.
Hey, are you okay?
He called out once more, but the man was unresponsive. His gaze wandered to the entrance of the club, where two bouncers were busy handling a rowdy guy. Looking back at the collapsed man in the dark alley, part of Ethan's mind told him to ignore him. But for whatever reason, he decided against his better judgment to approach the man. He pulled out his phone, ready to dial 911 as he saw the man's face caked in blood. A sharp hiss escaped his mouth as he cringed inwardly at the sight. He could only hope the man was still breathing. It looked like he took a nasty fall, he assumed. He didn't want to move him in fear of accidentally doing any damage to the guy. And so he was about to call 911 when a sudden voice surprised him from behind.
Found you.
Ethan hastily turned around and came face to face with a beautiful woman. Her silver hair was unusual, and her deep crimson eyes caused a shiver to run down his spine.
Lenses. It's already past Halloween. Do you know this man? He's hurt. I was just about to call an ambulance.
Ethan spoke as he dialed 911. The woman, impossibly pale, approached him with a wide grin. Ethan took a step back, almost subconsciously, but somehow she was already in front of him. His eyes widened slightly as he raised his hand.
What?
The woman didn't give him any time to react. Her hand moved like a blur and snatched his phone before she hung up.
Lady, I don't know what's your problem, but I'm going to need my phone back.
Ethan frowned, the cold February wind causing him to slightly sober up. The silver-haired woman didn't reply, and instead she continued to look at him with her creepy grin.
Hello? Can't you see the guy is hurt?
Ethan quickly lost his patience and lunged for his phone. The strange woman's figure suddenly turned into a blur that disappeared and reappeared, squatting in front of the collapsed drunk guy.
He's dead already.
She answered with a shrug, her voice cold and emotionless.
What the fuck?
Ethan stuttered as he saw her disappear and reappear.
I'm not that drunk. Did she teleport? Dead?
He questioned, his eyes darting between the entrance of the alley and the creepy woman. His heart almost skipped a beat as she stood up and turned to him, her crimson-colored eyes akin to those of a predator.
Oh, fuck this.
Faced with her gaze, Ethan did what any rational person would do. He turned around and ran. The woman was not normal, and he wasn't planning on staying behind to find out how exactly. He quickly made it out of the alley and darted toward the club.
Help! Help!
His shouts quickly drew the attention of the bouncer standing by the entrance.
Whoa, calm down. Had one too much to drink, buddy?
The bouncer quickly raised his hands to stop him. It was already 3 in the morning, and the line to the club was now non-existent. The only people at the entrance were a few drunk guys laughing together, along with a couple of people waiting for their rides back.
There's a dead body in the alley over there, and some creepy lady. Call the cops.
Ethan hastily spoke, his eyes glancing at the alley in worry. His heart was still beating wildly in his chest, and he forcefully tried to calm his breathing. Hearing his words, the bouncer frowned and asked,
A dead body.
Yeah, man. Look, can you just hurry? That crazy bitch took my phone. Call the cops.
Buddy, how many drinks did you have tonight?
the bouncer asked, his frown deepening.
Brother, what part of there is a dead body in the alley? Did you not hear?
Ethan was practically shouting by the end. It was then that the second bouncer came back from inside.
What's going on?
He asked.
This guy says something about a dead body and a crazy woman in the alley.
A sigh escaped from the second bouncer's mouth.
This night just keeps on getting worse.
He muttered in annoyance.
Stay here. I'll go check it out. Come on, show me where's this dead body.
He said as he turned to Ethan. Ethan felt reluctant to go back there, so he quickly pointed the man toward the alley.
Just the one right there.
The bouncer nodded and cautiously made his way toward it. Ethan felt his breathing pick up as he watched the man turn and disappear around the corner. After a few seconds, the man reappeared and motioned for him to come. Anxious, Ethan hesitated before ultimately making his way to the bouncer.
There's nothing here except that small pool of blood,
The bouncer said.
Your man probably drank too much and knocked himself out. I guess he woke up and left.
Huh?
Confused, Ethan scanned the dim alley, finding no signs of the man.
What about the woman? Did you see a silver-haired woman?
The bouncer shook his head and patted Ethan's shoulder.
No, there was no one. But since the guy already left, you should probably get home and get some rest as well.
The bouncer added and turned around to leave.
But how?
Scratching his head, Ethan stood in the alley in shock for a few moments when the unmistakable ring of notification came from the ground. His hand moved to pick up his phone with a frown. His driver was already there.
Did I really drink too much?
He muttered to himself, his eyes resting on the small pool of blood. Shaking his head, Ethan turned away to leave, casting the alley one final glance. His lift was already waiting for him, so after a quick confirmation, he hopped in and leaned his head back on the car's back seat. A long sigh escaped his mouth. Thankfully, the driver didn't speak much except to confirm his destination, something he greatly appreciated since he'd very much rather the silence over the meaningless small talk. It took another 10 minutes before the car stopped in front of his house. Ethan thanked the driver and stepped out. The cold breeze caused him to pull his coat tighter around his neck as he rushed to the comfort of his home. He tapped his pockets in search of his keys, while his eyes habitually scanned the neighborhood. It was eerily silent at this time of the night, but Ethan never felt unsafe before, that is, until tonight. The memory of that woman's predatorial eyes still haunted him as he unlocked the first-floor door. He quickly scurried inside and made sure he closed it before he made his way to the elevator.
Last time, I'll go out with that jerk.
He cursed under his breath as the ding of the elevator sounded. He went inside and pushed the button for the 5th floor.
Go out clubbing, he said. It will be fun, he said.
He continued to grumble under his breath.
Damn asshole. Told him I'm on a tight budget this month.
He continued the curse as the elevator door opened. Another sigh escaped his lips as he tousled his short, curly hair. With the keys in hand, he opened the door to his apartment, reaching for the light switch as he immediately removed his coat. Ethan was tempted to go straight to bed, but the smell caused him to frown in disgust.
A quick shower then.
Stepping out of the shower, Ethan wiped the foggy mirror and studied his reflection. Short, black, curly hair, deep brown eyes, and a slightly pale complexion. The dark circles under his eyes were a testament to countless sleepless nights working 2 jobs to cover rent and basic expenses.
How long am I going to continue living like this?
Taking a deep breath, Ethan forcefully pushed down the surge of emotion that tried to overwhelm him.
It's okay. You got this. We got this. We can do it. I can do it, even if I'm alone.
He lightly slapped his cheeks and nodded before leaving the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist.
Took you long enough.
A sudden familiar voice made him freeze as soon as he walked to his room. Sitting on his bed was the same creepy woman from earlier. Her crimson eyes locked on him, making him feel like prey.
Cute place you got here.
She said as she scanned the room. Ethan's brain, meanwhile, was going on overdrive.
How the fuck did she get here?
His eyes looked toward the open window and slightly widened.
Impossible. This is the 5th floor.
As soon as she stood up, he ran toward the kitchen. Her light-hearted laughter brought him goosebumps as he hastily searched for a knife.
What are you doing?
She asked, her voice right behind him.
Ah, fuck off!
Ethan turned wildly and slashed with the knife in panic. The woman, however, was undisturbed. She calmly flicked her wrist and disarmed him with inhuman speed.
Look, look. Wait. Let's talk. Okay.
Ethan spoke as he anxiously raised his hands. The woman was now mere inches from his face. The knife in her hand shone with a dangerous light.
You're cute.
She smiled and lightly grabbed his chin.
Look, lady, I don't have any money. I'm not even sure I can cover for my rent this month.
Shush.
She gently touched his lips and then rested her hand on his heart.
I don't want your money.
She chuckled.
What the hell do you want?
Your life.
She said with a wide grin, her mouth opening to an unnatural degree. Her fangs were the last thing Ethan saw as he closed his eyes in fear before darkness consumed him.
Foo.
Chapter 2. The Strangers.
Ugh, my head.
Ethan groaned. His head felt like it was going to explode and his body was heavy.
How much did I drink?
He cursed as he opened his eyes and glanced at the dark room. His hand habitually patted the side of the bed for his phone. When he didn't find it, he turned with a frown.
Where is it?
He forced himself to stand up, the headache threatening to overwhelm him. Another moan escaped his mouth as he clutched his head in pain. The curtains were closed and the room was still dark, but he could hear the noise of the city outside.
When did I fall asleep?
He muttered as he pushed himself out of bed. Memories of the night before were a blur. He frowned as he tried to recall them. As soon as he opened his bedroom door, the bright sunlight in the living room caused him to shield his eyes in pain. It was too bright, and the damn headache did not subside.
Oh God, I'm never drinking again.
He cursed as he fumbled toward the kitchen. His phone was there on the counter. Ethan grabbed it and checked the time. It was already 1 p.m. Thankfully, since today was a Sunday, he had the day off. He quickly went through his phone and was not surprised by the lack of messages. The only notification he had was of a novel he was following. Shaking his head, Ethan opened the fridge and grabbed a water bottle. He was extremely thirsty, probably due to his drinking too much the night before. His hand suddenly froze as he caught a glance at a knife placed on the counter. Memories of the previous night suddenly rushed forward like a flood. The dead man in the alley, the crazy silver-haired lady. She broke into his house and attacked him in the kitchen. Everything came back all at once. The water bottle slipped from his hand and fell on the floor with a light thud. Ethan hastily scanned his surroundings. His apartment was small, a single bedroom, one living room with an open kitchen, and a single bathroom. The living room was clear, his room was empty, and that only left the bathroom. He cautiously eyed the knife and nervously gulped. With his phone clutched in his hand, he slowly moved to the bathroom. The door was closed and he couldn't hear anyone inside. Taking a deep breath, Ethan mentally counted to 3 and opened the door with a bang.
Phew.
A long sigh of relief escaped his mouth as he looked at the empty bathroom.
Am I losing my mind?
He muttered to himself. The house was empty and there was no sign of the strange woman. A part of him tried to dismiss the memories as nothing but a drunk man's hallucinations. But deep down, he knew that wasn't possible. He was sure of it. He didn't drink that much yesterday. Not to mention, everything was too real.
Just who the hell was that?
He moved to the sink to wash his face before he froze.
Oh, what the hell?
Staring back at him was a pair of cold, dead eyes. For a moment, Ethan thought he was hallucinating. His face was deathly pale. His hair was still the same color, but his eyes were gray.
What the?
He approached the mirror, staring deep into his reflection with disbelief.
My eyes.
He muttered as he rubbed his eyes in shock. No matter how long he stared at them, they remained gray. It made him look like a corpse, his dead eyes, the pale color of his skin. Ethan's mind was going into overdrive as he stumbled out of the bathroom. The bright sunlight caused him to frown as he collapsed on the sofa.
What the hell did she do to me?
He cursed as he stared at his pale fingers. Sure, the countless night shifts and long working hours had taken their toll on his body, but he was never this pale. He could see the blue veins under his skin. Just as he was scratching his head at the absurdity of the entire situation, A sudden pain from his heart caused him to collapse on the ground, clutching his chest. The pain was swift. It came out of nowhere and knocked the breath out of him. He could hear his heart slowly beating in his chest, the rhythm growing weaker and weaker.
Am I dying?
The pain was unbearable, and he could not breathe. He didn't even have the strength to scream for help. Ethan looked at his phone, placed on the table, and stretched his hand to grab it, but it was futile. He didn't have the energy to reach it. He curled his body in pain, tears streaming out of his eyes, as he continued to hear his heartbeat grow weaker and weaker before eventually it stopped. His vision grew darker, and the noises from the street below became muffled. Ethan felt as if his blood was boiling underneath his skin. A roar escaped his mouth as his face contorted and morphed into that of a monster with fangs before it quickly reverted to normal. The sound of frantic knocking on his door caused him to weakly turn his head toward it and reach out with his hand.
Help, please. Anyone.
The world began to spin as he felt his bones creaking painfully. It was then that the door to his apartment burst open.
Shit, it started already.
A brown-haired middle-aged lady said as she approached him.
We have to take care of it, or else it's going to be a mess.
A dark-skinned man answered by her side. Both of the strangers had faint golden eyes. They walked closer to Ethan, who was now convulsing violently. The man clicked his tongue in annoyance and took out an unorthodox knife.
Make it quick this time. I don't want to clean up another mess.
The woman added.
Then you do it.
The man grumbled as he kneeled and grabbed Ethan by the hair. Ethan weakly opened his eyes and stared at his would-be killer when the man froze.
What are you doing? Kill him already and let's go.
The woman spoke.
Clara, you got to see this.
He replied.
Damn it, Terrell, what is it this time?
She cursed as she approached Ethan. Her eyes widened in shock as she looked at his face.
Oh dear, this is not good. This is not good at all.
She mumbled.
What the fuck do we do, Clara? He's a gray.
Clara stood up and took a deep breath.
Okay, let me just think for a second.
She said.
We don't have a second, Clara. It's a fucking gray. I'm not touching him.
Terrell cursed and released his hold on Ethan, causing his head to hit the ground.
It can't be her. She can't be back.
Clara anxiously bit her nail as she paced through the small living room.
I'm not taking that chance, Clara.
Terrell said as he stood up and raised his hands.
If you want to do it, you go ahead. But not even the council can make me kill her fucking offspring.
Calm down, damn it. We don't know for sure if it's her or not.
Look at his fucking eyes, Clara. They are gray. If not her, then who?
Shit. We can't leave him like this. He's going to go wild soon.
She cursed and took out her phone.
Who are you calling?
Terrell asked.
Back up.
She said anxiously as she eyed Ethan.
Just us two are not going to be enough.
She added.
So he lives?
Terrell asked.
I thought you said not even the council can get you to kill him?
Clara asked sarcastically.
Why changed your mind now?
Terrell quickly shook his head.
No. Let's just get past this first and let them handle everything else.
Clara rolled her eyes and walked out of the apartment.
Hello. Yeah, we need help.
Her voice trailed off as she left, leaving behind a nervous Terrell.
Hey man, listen. It's going to be all right.
He spoke, trying to calm Ethan. Ethan tried to open his eyes again to look at the man, but he was in too much pain. Another roar escaped his mouth, and his face morphed once more.
Ah, fuck, Clara. We don't have much time.
Terrell yelled out and hastily moved away from Ethan.
What happened?
She asked as she walked back and closed the door behind her. Terrell pointed to Ethan and replied,
I think it's starting.
he said.
Damn it. I guess it's just you and me then until backup arrives. They are already on their way.
Another bestial roar escaped Ethan. A dark, shadowy aura began to emit out of his body. It slowly began to expand, covering the entire living room and plunged it into darkness with Ethan in the middle of it.
Are you sure we can hold on until then?
Terrell asked.
We don't have much of a choice.
Clara hissed as sharp claws extended from her nails.
I knew it was bad luck to come with you.
Terrell groaned as his eyes glowed brighter.
Me! This is all you. I was fine working alone.
Clara grumbled in annoyance.
Sure. That's why you push all the work to me.
Shut up, Terrell. Now is not the time.
She said as she faced Ethan.
He's standing up, Clara.
I can see that.
She nervously gulped.
Now calm down, boy. I know you can hear me in there.
She said. Ethan had his head down, his face masked by the thick, shadowy aura that constantly emitted from his body. Hearing her words, Ethan slowly raised his head and faced them. His gray eyes were blank, akin to those of a dead man. His gaze caused shivers to run down Clara and Terrell's spine.
That's it. We are here to help you.
Clara spoke softly in an attempt to reassure him. Ethan turned to glance at her and tilted his head slightly. His figure blurred and reappeared right in front of her.
Fuck.
Terrell tensed.
Don't move.
Clara whispered, her claws slowly retracting as she raised her hands.
We are not here to fight you. We are here to help.
She said. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he turned his gaze to Terrell. The man shuddered in response, his golden eyes flickering with a stronger light. His figure disappeared again and reappeared right in front of him. Gray eyes, like shards of ice, bore into Terrell's soul. And then, with a cruel intimacy, Ethan moved closer, mere inches away. His breath, a frosty whisper, grazed Terrell's skin.
Terrell cursed before he lashed out, a kick fueled by fear sending Ethan hurtling backward. The living room's wall splintered, yielding to the impact. Plaster rained down like confetti at a twisted celebration.
Why did you do that?
Clara shouted.
I panicked.
Terrell hastily replied. Chapter 3. The Monster Within. Claws extended out of Clara's hands. A curse escaped her mouth as she glared at her companion.
I had it under control.
He was invading my personal space.
Terrell answered. Clara was about to argue with him when her eyes widened.
Watch out.
Right after her warning, Ethan's figure shot from the rubble and reappeared before Terrell. Terrell tried to attack him again, but Ethan was well prepared. He leisurely ducked the claw strike aimed at his face and slapped the man to the ground.
Shit!
Clara cursed and launched herself at him, aiming for his back. Ethan weaved her attack and kicked her feet, throwing her off balance. Clara, however, seemed to know she was no match, so she hastily grabbed Terrell by the collar and dragged him back.
They don't pay me enough for this.
Terrell groaned in pain.
Shut up. He's still confused, so we have a chance.
Clara replied. True to her words, Ethan did not follow up with another attack. Instead, he stood in the middle of the living room with a blank look. The shadowy aura emitting out of his body had plunged the entire room into darkness.
Why is he just standing there?
Terrell whispered.
I told you he's confused. His rational mind is still in there.
Taking a deep breath, Clara raised her hands to show she meant no harm.
Calm down, kid. I know how you feel, but you have to control your emotions. Don't let them control you.
She said. Ethan turned and faced her. His head was in so much pain. His entire body felt like it wasn't his. He tried to focus, but everything was murky. He could feel himself moving, but it felt like he was on autopilot. He could barely make out what was happening. The man attacked him. Who was he? Then the woman. Why was she staring at him like that? Her golden eyes emitted a soft glow. It was strangely soothing.
That's right. Calm down. We are not your enemies.
Clara added. The shadowy aura stopped swirling as he stared at her eyes. Ethan tried to open his mouth to speak, but he couldn't. He felt like a spectator in his own body. It didn't help that everything was so murky and the headache. The damn headache.
That's it.
Clara said and continued to approach him. Just when she was at arm's length, the window suddenly exploded behind them and 3 figures jumped in. The door burst open as well and 3 more rushed inside.
Fuck.
Clara muttered right before she was sent flying. Her body collided with Terrell, sending both of them to the ground. Ethan's roar echoed through the small apartment, his features contorting into something otherworldly. His teeth elongated, resembling sharp fangs, while his sunken cheeks gave him a ghastly appearance. His eyes now glowed an eerie white. 2 figures lunged at him from behind. Clad in obsidian black, their faces concealed by stark white masks, they were relentless in their assault. Just before they reached him, the previously tranquil shadows surged forward like blades, launching an attack. The first assailant was instantly cleaved in half, the gory sight driving Ethan into a frenzy. His mind was screaming at him to tear and kill. Undisturbed by their companion's death, the remaining 5 assailants rushed him all at once. A savage grin made its way across Ethan's face. He relished in the feeling. His body moved like a blur, leaving after images as he jumped to the ceiling. He used both his hands and feet to stick to the wall before he launched himself at one of his assailants. The masked assailant recoiled, momentarily surprised. With a swift motion, they brandished a short sword, aiming to slash at Ethan. But Ethan's response defied the laws of physics. His body twisted at an impossible angle. His hand shot forward, fingers closing around the attacker's arm. In a gruesome display of raw strength, he wrenched it out, sinew and bone yielding to his relentless force. Ethan's hand moved with lightning speed, silencing his attacker's cries as his head was severed cleanly from his body. Witnessing the brutal scene, Terrell cursed and pulled Clara back towards the entrance.
Hurry up and stand, damn it, or we're both going to die.
Easy for you to say, asshole. That kick nearly caved my chest in.
She gasped, struggling to catch her breath. Terrell ignored her complaints, his eyes wide with fear as he watched Ethan decimate their backup.
We might need to get the hell out of here.
We can't just leave like this. The council.
Her words were abruptly cut off as she saw Ethan twist the last attacker's head off his body.
Ah, shit.
Terrell muttered, dropping Clara and raising his hand in a protective stance. Claws extended from his fingers as he nervously gulped.
This is the last time I follow you into a job.
He gritted his teeth.
Now's not the time, Terrell.
Clara retorted, struggling to her feet. Her eyes seemed to glow slightly as Ethan turned his attention to them.
Brace yourself.
She tensed, when suddenly, thud.
Huh?
Terrell couldn't help but mutter as he stared at the unconscious Ethan on the floor.
What just happened?
Clara released a long sigh of relief before collapsing.
Thank all heavens and hell he finally tired himself out.
Terrell turned to her and asked.
We live?
She looked back and smiled.
We live?
The duo then burst into laughter. Ethan had a long, strange dream. He dreamt of a beautiful yet eerie silver-haired lady, her crimson eyes appearing as if they could pierce his soul. In his dream, he became a monster that tore through people with ease. Even as he fought in his dream, those crimson eyes were everywhere, staring at him, watching him. He dreamt of himself changing, his body no longer the same as before. The dream swiftly ended with the strange lady's wide-open mouth, full of razor-sharp teeth, approaching him. That's when he awoke with a gasp. It took him a moment to come to his senses as he clutched his chest. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Ethan scanned his surroundings in shock. He wasn't in his tiny one-bedroom apartment. No, he appeared to be locked inside a cage in a basement somewhere.
Kidnapped? But why me?
That was his immediate thought before a massive headache caused him to curl in pain. And with it came the unpleasant memories. It took Ethan a few minutes before he managed to sit back up and lean against the wall, his mind in turmoil. His hand slowly moved to his chest and rested over his heart, but he no longer felt it beat. A wave of fear and disbelief washed over him. It was true. He was no longer human.
How could this be?
He thought back to the men that attacked him back in his house. He killed them, all of them. Ethan placed his head between his knees and clutched it with his hands. He had killed people. He was a murderer. Were they humans or monsters? A small voice whispered in his mind. They attacked us. They deserved to die. The voice continued. Ethan shook his head.
No, I'm not a murderer.
Haha, no, you are not. You are something far worse. You are a monster.
No, I'm not.
Ethan continued to shake his head.
Embrace it. Accept me. Together we can do anything we want, so,
The voice continued.
Get out of my head.
heh,
The voice snickered.
face it, you don't feel bad for what you did. Quite the opposite. You enjoyed it.
I didn't. I'm not a murderer. I'm not a monster.
Then why are you smiling? Hearing that question, Ethan paused, his hands slowly moving to touch his lips only to find them curved upwards.
Ah,
Chapter 4. Red Eyes. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps. causing Ethan to raise his head and stare at the newcomer. Looking at the familiar face made him raise his eyebrow. He recognized the man as one of his attackers from the house. Terrell seemed surprised to see him up. He turned his head upstairs and shouted,
He's awake!
Ethan remained silent, observing as Terrell hesitantly approached his cage.
Hey there, remember me?
Terrell nervously gulped and stopped a few steps away from the cage. Ethan didn't reply. His eyes carefully studied the man before him. Golden eyes. He's weak. They are all weaker than us, the voice returned, but Ethan ignored it. He wasn't sure what type of situation he found himself in, but his mind was strangely clear. Surprisingly, he felt no fear. Looking at the man nervously staring at him with an awkward expression, Ethan came to a simple conclusion. He was superior. Yes, we are better, the voice continued, making Ethan frown. Seeing that, Terrell misunderstood and hastily took a few steps back, nearly climbing the stairs the way he came.
I don't mean you no harm.
He raised his hands.
You tried to kill me.
Ethan spoke for the first time, his voice sounding gruffer than he remembered.
No? Well, yes, at first only.
Smack.
Shut up, you idiot.
Clara, who just appeared, spoke as she slapped the back of his head before making her way toward the cage.
Welcome to the world of the ever-living.
She said.
My name is Clara, the idiot's Terrell.
Ethan frowned. He remembered her as well. She was also there back in the house.
This is the part where you also introduce yourself.
Terrell chimed. Ethan's frown deepened. He hesitated for a second before answering.
My name's Ethan.
Clara nodded.
I would say it's a pleasure to meet you, but really it's not.
She said while massaging her forehead.
Where am I?
In one of the council's safe houses.
Terrell replied, finally gathering enough courage to approach the cage.
The council.
Clara sighed and replied,
The Eternal Council, the Crimson Covenant, or just the Council for short. It's the governing body of the Vampire Society. Comprised of the oldest and most powerful vampires, they oversee all matters related to our kind. They enforce laws, maintain order between the clans, and ensure the secrecy of our existence from the human world.
Why did you bring me here?
Terrell chuckled.
I'm not sure how to break the news to you, buddy, but you are no longer human.
Ignore him. What do you remember from last night?
Clara moved closer to the bars and asked,
Kill her. Feast on her blood. Who does she think she is?
Shut up! Ethan grimaced in pain as he struggled against the voice in his head.
It's talking to you, isn't it?
Terrell asked with a grim expression.
It?
Ethan clutched his head and asked,
It has many names. Some call it the curse of bloodlust, but most refer to it as the thirst. It tempts you, promising power beyond your imagination. However, the more you listen to it, the more you lose yourself. Control it. Don't let it control you. The first day is the worst.
Clara explained.
Usually it's your sire that's supposed to walk you through this.
Terrell grumbled. Clara nodded by his side.
Which is why we need to know. What do you remember from the night before?
Ethan leaned back against the wall and raised his head to stare at the dark ceiling.
What should I do?
The thirst persisted, slowly gnawing at his sanity. He could keep it at bay for now, but wasn't sure for how long.
You can trust us. If we wanted to harm you, we wouldn't have brought you here and would have done so while you were unconscious.
Clara reassured him, her eyes glowing slightly in the dark.
Stop doing that.
Ethan growled.
Doing what?
She asked, feigning ignorance.
You ask me to trust you when you aren't being truthful yourself.
He shook his head.
I don't know what you mean.
Bang! Ethan's figure blurred as he moved with inhuman speed, reappearing by the bars in an instant. Before Clara could react, his hand shot out and tightened around her neck.
Do not lie to me.
He barred his teeth.
I'm sorry.
Clara gasped as she clutched his hand. Terrell had no time to react, frozen in place as Ethan's grip tightened around Clara's neck. It wasn't until Ethan released her that Terrell finally snapped out of his stupor.
Talk while I can still control myself.
Ethan walked back and sat down. Clara massaged her neck, her eyes wide with fear. She shot a glance at Terrell, who looked equally shocked and afraid before she finally spoke.
Vampires are different from what you might be familiar with. Garlic doesn't affect us, and neither does salt. We still have our reflections in mirrors, and sunlight doesn't kill us. It weakens us, sure, but we don't burst into flames.
Terrell scoffed beside her.
The exaggerated stories are mostly the council's doing to hide what real vampires are like.
He added. Clara nodded and continued.
The clans are divided by colors.
She explained, pointing to her eyes.
I'm gold, same as Terrell. Our gifts are usually physical. You can think of us as the muscle of the council.
Ethan shook his head.
What you were trying to do to me, that didn't feel like a physical gift.
Vampires usually inherit one special gift from their sire when they turn. Most of the time, this gift is related to their clan. Gold is physical, blue is mental, black is shape-shifting, and so on.
She paused for a moment, glancing at her hands.
In my case, I was fortunate to inherit a second gift from my master. It's rare but not unheard of. It's not very strong since I'm still a gold, but I can influence others' emotions to a certain degree. I can make them calmer, more agitated, things like that.
Ethan nodded.
How many clans are there?
Terrell whistled.
Too many? But the main ones are gold, blue, black, green, brown, and
He seemed to hesitate for a second before continuing.
red.
Ethan frowned. He remembered seeing himself in the mirror, those dead-looking gray eyes. His fingers traced his face and reached his eyes before he stopped.
What about mine, Gray?
Clara and Terrell exchanged a glance before she hesitantly replied.
It's complicated.
Ethan's eyes narrowed.
Elaborate.
Clara took a deep breath.
Grays are special.
Terrell glanced at her and interjected.
Ah, damn it. Just be straight about it. Grays are ticking time bombs. No offense.
Clara glared at him but didn't refute.
It could be put in a better way, but in a sense, he's right.
The creak of a door opening upstairs interrupted their conversation, drawing the trio's attention towards the staircase.
It's time.
Clara whispered. Ethan frowned, sensing an oppressive aura drawing near. His non-beating heart seemed to skip a beat. Moments later, a middle-aged man in an exquisite black suit appeared. His gray hair was neatly brushed back and his face was clean-shaven. What unsettled Ethan the most, however, were the man's crimson eyes. They reminded him of the crazed, silver-haired lady. Clara and Terrell stepped back, bowing respectfully as the man approached. Their faces were solemn, eyes fixed on him as he neared the cage. The man paid them no heed, his gaze unwaveringly set on Ethan.
So it's true. A gray has appeared.
The man spoke, his voice resonant and deep. His eyes, glinting with a trace of disgust, remained fixed on Ethan. The cage door burst open with a deafening bang. Ethan's mouth fell open in shock. He had been staring at the man, no, the vampire, since the beginning, but he hadn't seen him move. He's fast. I couldn't follow his movements at all.
Stand up.
The man commanded, and Ethan obeyed. The vampire before him was beyond his ability to confront. His instincts screamed that attempting to fight would be a death sentence. Cold sweat trickled down his back, and his legs felt like they might give out at any moment.
Follow me.
With that, the man turned and began to walk away. Ethan briefly entertained the thought of attacking him now that his back was turned, but he quickly dismissed the idea. An inexplicable sense of foreboding told him that the red-eyed vampire was expecting it, almost daring him to make a move.
Try to stay alive.
Terrell whispered as he passed. Chapter 5. The Council. Emerging from the basement, Ethan's eyes swept across his surroundings. The main floor of the house was shrouded in darkness, the dim light casting eerie shadows in the living room. A few vampires with golden eyes stood silently, their presence both menacing and reverent. As the crimson-eyed elder entered, they bowed deeply, their gaze shifting to Ethan with a mix of curiosity and suspicion as he walked past. The elder paid no heed to the others and strode out of the house. By the entrance, a sleek black sedan awaited, with a muscular vampire in a suit and sunglasses standing vigil beside it. Ethan glanced around, noting the desolate suburban neighborhood. Night had already fallen.
How long was I out?
He wondered. As they stepped outside, The driver promptly moved to open the back door for the elder. Ethan followed him into the car. The drive was silent as they left the suburban streets behind. Ethan realized he had never ventured into this part of town before. The atmosphere inside the car was heavy with tension, but the elder seemed perfectly content with the silence. Before long, they were back in the city, the night still young. The car navigated through downtown and eventually halted in front of a towering skyscraper. The entrance was deserted, save for 2 security guards standing watch. The driver exited and opened the door, allowing the elder to step out, with Ethan following closely behind.
Elder!
The guard spoke, bowing deeply as they passed through the glass doors. As they walked inside, the interior of the skyscraper revealed itself in all its grandeur. The lobby was vast and luxurious, with high ceilings adorned with intricate chandeliers that cast a warm, golden glow. Marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the walls were lined with elegant dark wood paneling. A grand staircase spiraled upwards, its banisters wrought in ornate ironwork. To the side, a sleek, modern reception desk stood, though it was currently unoccupied. Plush seating areas were scattered throughout, with luxurious sofas and armchairs arranged around low glass tables. The air was cool and carried a faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. As they moved deeper into the lobby, the sound of their footsteps echoed softly. The elder guided them to the elevators. With a soft ding, the doors slid open and they stepped inside. The elder produced a card and swiped it across the panel before pressing a sequence of buttons. The elevator hummed to life and began its swift descent.
Down?
Ethan raised his brow. The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity before finally coming to a halt. When the doors opened, the sight that greeted Ethan made him blink in surprise. A vast hall, adorned in Gothic splendor, stretched out before him. A rich red carpet unfurled along the floor, leading deeper into the hall. The walls were lined with portraits of vampires, each with eyes of varying colors, their gazes seeming to follow the duo as they walked. Ethan's curiosity was piqued as he studied the paintings, each one telling a silent story of the vampire it depicted. The elder continued forward with purpose, while Ethan's eyes lingered on the intriguing artwork. They didn't come across anyone, but Ethan couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. Before long, the duo arrived at an imposing heavy iron door. The elder stopped and tapped it gently, causing it to creak open. Inside was a spacious room with 6 elevated chairs, arranged in a circle around a small platform. 3 of the chairs were already occupied. Ethan frowned as he felt the weight of their gazes upon him, the pressure intensifying as all eyes turned in his direction. To the right sat a young man in his early 20s, with short blonde hair and crimson eyes. His impassive expression remained unchanged as he studied Ethan. He was dressed in a tailored black suit, the sharp lines accentuating his youthful yet authoritative presence. Next to him was the only woman in the gathering. She appeared to be in her 30s, with olive-colored skin and wavy dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her scarlet eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and intensity. She wore a deep burgundy dress that complemented her striking features, the fabric flowing elegantly around her as she sat with an air of quiet confidence. The last figure was shrouded in a long, dark robe, obscuring all distinguishing features and making it impossible to discern whether it was a man or a woman. Ethan glanced at the enigmatic figure, their head bowed, before turning his attention back to the elder who had led him here.
Marius, you're late.
The blonde vampire remarked, his expression deadpan.
Oh dear, it matters not. Time is all we have.
The olive-skinned vampire beside him chuckled, a teasing smile playing on her lips. Her scarlet eyes sparkled with curiosity as she studied Ethan intently. Marius ignored them and made his way to his seat.
It does matter, Pauline. If we can't trust one of the elders to be punctual, what would the others think of the council?
The blonde vampire kept his neutral expression as he replied. Marius frowned as he sat down.
Watch your tone, Damien. It was you who did not wish to go. If anything, I was doing you a favor.
Damien clicked his tongue and turned to Ethan.
I assume there has been no problem in bringing him here.
No,
Marius replied curtly.
A well-behaved boy. I like that.
Feline smiled.
Did he feed yet?
Damien asked.
not yet.
Ethan observed as they continued their conversation, seemingly oblivious to his presence. The voice that usually whispered to him was unusually silent, leaving him feeling detached as if he were an outsider watching the scene unfold.
Do you have a name, child?
Feline asked, her voice breaking through his reverie. Ethan realized she was addressing him. He turned to her and nodded.
Ethan Oakes.
Feline nodded thoughtfully.
Cute, but newly born vampires are supposed to drop their last names and take on that of their sires. Though in your case, we must first decide if you will live for that to happen.
Her eyes sparkled with a mix of amusement and curiosity as she spoke.
So tell me, child, why should we let you live?
Feline continued, her gaze unwavering. Ethan glanced at the four elders surrounding him and began to speak.
I had no say in turning into this. I was attacked by that crazy bitch and couldn't do anything. I don't know who she is. I don't know who you are. What I do know, however, is that you are strong.
He said slowly, meeting each of their eyes.
I don't feel like myself anymore. Everything feels muffled, so I don't care. I don't care what you decide. I can't win against all of you, but know this, I will not go down without a fight.
His eyes shone brightly as he spoke, a dangerous aura emanating from his body. A momentary silence descended on the hall before Marius spoke with a scowl.
How presumptuous.
His scarlet eyes bore down on Ethan as the elder suddenly stood up. Damien frowned but did not reply while Felina laughed.
Ha 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 ha. He's not very bright, this one. Cute. I like him.
She grinned. Ethan's body tensed, bracing for the inevitable attack. Just then, the robed figure suddenly raised a hand. It was unbelievably pale, with long, sharp white nails. Seeing this, Marius hesitated but then sat back down, while Feline seemed unfazed, her predatory grin remaining fixed on Ethan.
Send him to Clara and Terrell. They will teach him in place of his sire.
The robed figure spoke, their voice ancient. Damien turned to the robed figure and asked,
Are you sure about that? He is a Grey, not to mention who his sire is.
It's her first child. By the Council's rules, he is immune.
Marius frowned, his eyes staring daggers at Ethan. The mysterious figure continued.
As long as he does not break the rules, he can live.
Marius harumphed and stood up to leave.
What a waste of time.
He muttered. Damien shook his head and rose to follow, his eyes lingering on Ethan for a moment before he turned away. Feline was the last to rise. She bowed to the hooded figure before approaching Ethan. His body tensed as she gently touched his chin.
I'll see you soon, Ethan.
She murmured, her voice laced with a promise. With only the two of them left, the hall fell into an awkward silence.
Who are you?
Ethan asked. The mysterious figure shook its head slowly.
From this moment forward, you are no longer Ethan Oakes. Today, you are reborn as Ethan Eternus Mori. Embrace your new unlife.
Chapter 6. New Life. After the mysterious vampire dismissed him, Ethan was sent back to the surface, where another car was waiting for him. This time, the driver, a young man with a buzz cut and dull eyes, did not feel like a vampire or a human, which greatly puzzled Ethan. Still, he did not talk to the man, as his mind was occupied with what had just happened. He survived. All four elders were stronger than him, but he lived. Felina was strange, though he didn't sense any ill will from her. Damien was apprehensive, but not openly hostile, and Marius did not like him at all. Ethan wasn't sure why. Today had been the first day he met the man. Or vampire, for that matter. His hand slowly reached out and covered his eyes. Could it be because of my eyes? He wondered.
Nobody explained what it means to be a Grey, though.
Ethan sighed and massaged his temple. The car continued across downtown. The traffic was heavy despite the late hour. It was a sight Ethan was unused to. With work occupying all his time, He barely had any to go out. His life was a dull routine of work, food, sleep, and repeat. Was it even right to call it life? He didn't know. It had only been yesterday when he was worried about his rent, yet now such worries seemed so far, so distant. His apartment was trashed, and although he couldn't remember everything, he still had faint recollections of what had transpired. His mind briefly entertained the image of his landlord coming to collect rent, only to find the apartment in ruins. The thought brought a small smile to his face. Soon the car came to a stop. This time they were in a residential area full of townhouses. The driver said nothing as he parked by the curb. Ethan frowned and looked out of the window. The house, tall and narrow, was adorned with intricate wrought iron balconies. The brickwork, aged and weathered, bore the marks of time, each crack and crevice telling a story of its own.
Have we arrived?
Ethan asked, but the man remained silent. His dull eyes stared back at Ethan from the rearview mirror, filled with an unsettling anticipation. Ethan's frown deepened as he cast another glance at the house. With a sigh, he opened the door and stepped out. The second he was out, the car drove away.
Is he mute or something?
He wondered as he watched it depart. Shaking his head, Ethan scanned the neighborhood as he ascended the stairs. Despite its proximity to downtown, the area was surprisingly quiet. Then again, it had the unmistakable air of a wealthy neighborhood. Ethan's gaze moved to the front door, a heavy oak portal with ornate carvings. 2 lanterns flanked the entrance, casting a warm, inviting glow that contrasted sharply with the cool, shadowy corners of the building. Just as he was about to knock, the door slowly opened with a creak.
Well, fuck me.
A familiar face greeted him. Ethan raised his brow at the dark-skinned vampire before him, his mind struggling to recall his name. As if sensing his struggles, the vampire sighed and spoke.
It's Terrell.
Right.
Ethan nodded.
Are we good? You won't suddenly jump on me or anything?
Terrell asked. Before Ethan could respond, a hand reached out from behind and pulled Terrell back.
Don't mind the idiot. Please come in.
Clara said with a smile, stepping aside and gesturing for him to enter. He nodded and stepped inside. The grand foyer was bathed in the flickering light of crystal chandeliers. Ethan's eyes took in the polished marble floors and the walls adorned with rich velvet drapes. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, mingled with a hint of something more mysterious. His eyes moved to the left, where a sweeping staircase with an intricately carved banister led to the upper floors. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners, but Ethan found himself strangely at home.
Isn't this a bit too cliché?
Ethan couldn't help but ask. Terrell rolled his eyes.
And he has jokes. Wonderful.
Clara chuckled.
The house belongs to the council.
She explained.
They have an image to maintain.
Terrell added, standing beside her. Clara nodded.
So welcome to your new home.
At least until you get settled in.
Terrell chimed in.
I'm supposed to stay here?
Ethan absent-mindedly asked. His eyes were already wandering around.
Yes, until we teach you about the rules and get you settled in, you'll have to stay with us.
Terrell scratched his head.
That and your house is pretty much trashed, so you can't go back.
Ethan turned to the vampire with a frown, causing Terrell to hastily raise his hands.
Hey, don't look at me like that, man. You're a vampire now. You couldn't go back even if you wanted to.
Terrell is right. Your old life, old friends, family, you have to leave all of that behind. That is rule number 1.
Her tone was solemn as she stared into Ethan's eyes. Perhaps for someone else, the notion of leaving everything behind might seem dreadful, but not to Ethan. He had nothing in the first place.
I understand,
he calmly replied.
Yeah, it's shit, but we don't make the
Terrell paused.
Huh? What did you just say?
I said I understand. It's not like I had anything to go back to in the first place.
Terrell glanced at Clara and awkwardly scratched his head before he hesitantly tapped Ethan's shoulder.
You've had it rough as well, huh?
Ethan shrugged.
Same with everyone, I suppose.
Huh. You're not too bad after all.
Terrell smiled.
Your previous identity as Ethan Oakes will die in an explosion caused by a gas leak inside of your house.
Clara spoke as she led him further in, with Terrell following next to him. The dining room was a scene from a Gothic painting, with a long mahogany table set for a feast, though the plates remain untouched. Candles in silver candelabras cast a haunting glow, reflecting off the dark, polished surfaces. Clara motioned for him to take a seat, which he did. She then sat facing him with Terrell to her right. Their golden eyes seemed to glow ominously.
Do you have anything you want to ask?
You said an explosion.
Yes, there were too many traces left in the house. An explosion was the best option to cover everything.
Ethan nodded.
I see.
There will be a small funeral held for you, but that won't concern you any longer.
A funeral. What will you put in the casket?
Puzzled, he asked.
Nothing. It's a closed casket ceremony.
Ethan felt strange hearing that. No matter how indifferent he felt to everything at the moment, it was still weird.
I know it might be too much to take in right now, but you have an eternity to get used to it.
Clara reassured him with a smile. Ethan nodded, though his mind was still preoccupied by the thoughts of his funeral. Who would attend? How many people would even bother to come? 2? Maybe 3? How many would even notice he has gone missing? His bosses, that's for sure. The liquor store cashier downstairs. How pathetic. He sighed and lowered his head.
You okay?
Clara asked. Taking a deep breath, Ethan tried to steady his emotions and nodded.
Yes.
As I was saying, it might feel overwhelming, but you'll get used to it.
Time is all we have.
Terrell chuckled by her side.
The council will provide you with your new papers and documents, so you don't need to worry about that.
Clara continued.
Don't worry, you'll get to keep your first name at least.
Terrell added.
Yes, but now on a more serious subject.
Clara leaned in closer, her gaze serious as she spoke.
You haven't heard it yet, have you?
It?
The thirst.
No, it's quiet.
Clara and Terrell took a heavy sigh of relief.
Well, it seems like the worst has passed.
She said.
It won't always be quiet, so don't be surprised when it comes back.
Terrell added.
He's right, which brings us to our second topic, feeding.
Ethan slowly nodded. Vampires fed on blood. That was something everyone knew.
Yes, we feed on blood, but there are rules.
Clara raised her finger.
1. You only hunt in council-authorized ground.
She raised a second finger.
2. You do not kill your prey. The last thing we need is another hunter inquisition on our asses. And 3. You must never break the veil. Simple, right?
Hunters. Really?
Ethan couldn't help but ask. Terrell chuckled.
There's vampires. Why can't there be hunters?
Clara slowly nodded.
The world is bigger than you once knew.
I see. And what is this veil?
The veil is where the mundane and the supernatural coexist. It's how we maintain the delicate balance between our world and that of the unsuspecting humans.
What she means is, don't go around telling everyone you are a vampire. The council doesn't take kindly to that, and neither do the other forces.
Terrell explained. Chapter 7. New Home. Ethan nodded.
Cut ties with my previous life. Feed on council-authorized ground. Don't kill when I feed, and don't break the veil. Simple enough.
Clara smiled.
Yes. Do you have any other questions before we move on?
Ethan raised his finger and pointed to his eyes.
This. The different eye colors. I'm still confused about that. What exactly does it mean to be a gray?
Clara bit her lip. Her eyes turned to Terrell, who shook his head and raised his hands.
There are 5 main clans, Gold.
She said, and pointed to herself and Terrell.
Blue, they can read minds, hypnotize people, and some have telekinesis. Black are shapeshifters. They can transform into almost anything. Green are seers. They can see a glimpse into the future and can turn into mist. They are usually the hardest to kill.
Terrell chimed in.
And they are almost always batshit crazy.
Clara's expression was strange, but she didn't refute his words. She lightly coughed and continued.
Brown can control animals and can wield the power of the earth.
Ethan frowned.
So, magic.
Terrell grinned.
Oh yeah, never fight a brown in a forest or mountain.
Clara nodded.
Brown usually sticks to themselves. It's rare to encounter any in the cities.
I see. What about red?
Red are royalty.
Terrell replied solemnly.
They have all the powers and more. They are superior to all the other clans.
They call themselves the original bloodline.
Clara continued.
That just sounds conceited.
Ethan rolled his eyes. Terrell chuckled and replied,
They have the right to. They are the strongest, after all. Red usually stands at the head of the council in every city. Our beautiful city is blessed to have 4 of them.
Terrell continued sarcastically.
And gray.
Ethan asked the question he wanted to know the most.
There is no clan for a gray.
Clara hesitated before she continued.
When a red decides to turn a human, most of the time the newborn vampire is also a red. In some rare cases, however, a mutation occurs and a gray is born. Greys are not born with the same powers as their masters. They all gain different abilities.
Clara then turned to Terrell.
We don't know what type of abilities a gray can gain, but that's not what makes them terrifying.
His eyes bore at Ethan before he continued.
They can absorb the abilities of the other clans.
Ethan raised his brow at the revelation. That wasn't as bad as he expected. If anything, it sounded overpowered.
So what's the problem exactly?
He asked. Terrell sighed.
The problem is, all grays eventually turn crazy.
Clara continued.
There's a reason they are almost extinct. They can't control themselves.
Her golden eyes flickered as she stared at Ethan.
Which is why you need to be very careful.
Ethan nodded slowly.
I feel okay, though.
It's not now. You already killed and consumed a team of gold. You already possess the physical abilities of one. The more you consume, the more danger you put yourself in. There will come a point where the thirst will take over. It's inevitable.
Terrell nodded.
When that happens, you'll turn into a real monster, and the council will have you killed. So, try not to kill and consume any vampires, okay?
He winked.
Oh, you can kill the werewolves.
The what? They exist.
Terrell laughed.
Well, you exist, so...
Clara spoke.
They stay out of our business, and we stay out of theirs.
They haven't done a good job of staying out lately.
Terrell turned to Clara and argued.
Nobody wants a second war, Terrell. It'd only benefit the hunters.
Terrell shrugged.
I see. So avoid consuming other vampires.
Ethan nodded.
Yep, pretty simple, right? Which reminds me, you don't need to feed that much either.
Terrell replied. Clara nodded.
Yes, think of yourself as a crocodile. A couple of times per month is enough to last you for a while, so there's no need to overdo it.
Clara's right. A lot of newborns tend to overindulge. You'll understand why when you feed for the first time, but you can't afford to do that. I can't stress this enough.
Seeing Terrell's grave expression, Ethan nodded to show his understanding.
Good. Any other questions?
Yes. What do you know about the one who turned me?
A strange silence fell on the table, with Terrell and Clara eyeing each other. After a few seconds, Clara spoke first.
Her name is Luna Eternus Mori. She is probably the oldest vampire in the country.
And the craziest...
Terrell shuddered. Ethan frowned.
She did seem crazy when I met her.
At least you're lucky to have survived.
Terrell shook his head.
Reds seldom embrace new vampires. It's risky business.
Clara sighed. Terrell leaned in closer and continued.
Besides the fact that there's a small chance they end up with gray in their hands, I heard they also expand much of their strength in the process.
Luna is a wild card. She's famous, of course. But not for good reasons, I'm afraid. She came into town a few months back and would occasionally drop by the council meetings.
Clara continued.
Yes, which is how we guessed you were her child. None of the other elders are willing to risk their positions by embracing a random human. There's no benefit to it. What I'm confused about is, why you?
Terrell scratched his head.
Maybe he was just unlucky. Wrong place, wrong time.
Clara sighed. Terrell leaned back on his chair.
Maybe, but it's still strange if you ask me. She hasn't turned anyone before, at least none that anybody knows of, right? So why now? And why him?
He asked while pointing toward Ethan.
I was hoping you guys would know.
Huh! Nobody can claim to know what goes in the heads of those old monsters. Just be grateful you're alive, man.
Don't worry, not everything is bad. As Luna's first child, you are automatically granted immunity. This means you won't have to go through a trial to determine whether you live or die, and you are protected by the council. Of course, this protection is conditional on you not breaking the rules.
Clara explained.
Yes, but not everyone in the council likes you, so be careful.
Terrell added.
You'll get your chance to be introduced to the city's underworld society. All you must know is it's better to make allies than enemies. You'll need them.
I understand. Then, can I meet Luna?
Terrell facepalmed and answered,
Have you not heard anything I just said?
I don't want to see her either, but I need to know. Why did she turn me? Was it really just a whim?
Terrell turned silent. Clara nodded and spoke.
You will get your chance. I'm not sure when exactly, but she occasionally drops by the parties.
That's good enough for me.
Ethan answered with a pale smile. The memory of Luna's eerie face lingered in his mind. His emotions seemed muted, except for the fear he harbored toward her. Why? He planned to find out.
Well, let's get you to your room first.
Clara said, changing the subject, and stood up. Ethan followed behind her while Terrell stayed seated. The latter gave him a wave with a slight smile as the duo made their way back to the entrance and climbed up the stairs. Clara then led him past a few closed doors until they reached the end of the hall. She motioned to the door, and Ethan raised his brow before he opened it. A subconscious whistle escaped from his lips as he stepped inside.
This is mine.
He asked in disbelief. Clara grinned.
All yours.
This room is bigger than my apartment.
Clara chuckled and patted his back before she turned to leave.
Settle in and get some rest. You'll need it. Tomorrow, we will teach you how to hunt.
Ethan absent-mindedly nodded, his gaze fixed on the room. Perhaps a suite was a better way to describe it. The bedroom was draped in luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows that were covered with rich velvet curtains. The king-sized adorned with silk linens was placed in the center, flanked by sleek ebony nightstands. Ethan raised his head to the crystal chandelier that was casting a soft glow, illuminating the marble floor and plush Persian rug beneath. Unused to the level of luxury he suddenly found himself in, Ethan could only whisper,
This is fucking crazy.
Chapter 8. First Day. His first night was odd.
Ethan thought he would have problems sleeping.
The new place he found himself in, along with his strange circumstances, made it that he had a lot in mind. Still, the moment his head hit the bed, sleep took over. The room was completely dark when he woke up. His hands slipped from under the blanket as he stretched. A yawn escaped his lips. It took him a few seconds as he opened his eyes to make sense of where he was. Last night felt like a dream. The feeling of the soft bed beneath his body and the unfamiliar room, however, contradicted such thoughts. This was his life now. Although it was dark, Ethan had no problem seeing clearly. One of the perks of his new condition, he assumed. He reluctantly parted with his bed and glanced at the curtains. The sun was still up. He could feel it. It was almost instinctive.
Ethan hesitantly walked over and slowly opened the velvet curtains.
The sunlight peeked through, causing him to squint his eyes. Besides the slight headache, nothing happened to him. He felt no real pain, and his body was not catching fire.
It seems like I need some sunglasses.
Ethan mumbled as he pulled the curtains, plunging the room back into darkness. He then made his way to the bathroom and froze as he looked at his reflection.
I need to get used to this.
Ethan sighed as he stared at his dull gray eyes for a few seconds. Shaking his head, he washed his face and glanced at the toothbrush near the sink. Ethan tentatively sniffed it and shrugged.
Looks unused.
After finishing his morning routine, Ethan went back to his room to make his bed before leaving. The house was softly illuminated by the chandelier, and all the windows were covered. It appeared that his new roommates didn't like the sun as much as he did.
What the fuck did you just say? He's right there. My God, how can you be so blind?
Terrell's voice traveled from downstairs. Ethan raised his brow before he walked down. Did someone come? He wondered. The entrance door was closed. Ethan glanced towards the kitchen and turned to his right, where Terrell's voice came from.
Fuck it! Kill yourself, just kill yourself. How can one person be so bad?
Ethan hesitantly walked toward the large double doors and opened them. Terrell was sitting in the middle of a surprisingly modern living room with a 90-inch TV in front of him as he played a shooter game.
Damn it!
Terrell cursed and threw his controller on the sofa next to him. He took off his headset and then noticed Ethan, causing him to jump.
Ah, shit, man, you scared me.
Good morning.
Yeah, more like shit morning. You want to play?
Terrell asked, motioning to the controller.
No, I'm okay.
Yeah, me neither. Fuck this game. Too many try-hard kids.
Where's Clara?
Ethan asked as he moved to sit down on one of the chairs.
Probably still sleeping. We got a busy day, or rather a night later.
You're going to teach me how to feed?
Ethan asked.
Ah, that as well. But something else came up. Council business.
Ethan pointed to himself and asked,
What about me?
What about you? You're coming with us, of course.
Terrell grinned.
I see. So, what's this business about?
Some kids are misbehaving, so we gotta set them right.
Terrell grinned. Ethan frowned.
That doesn't really tell me anything.
Terrell laughed before answering,
It's okay. It'll be fun, I think. Just try not to kill and feast on anyone, okay?
Confused, Ethan nodded.
Okay.
Great. So the sun is still up, and it's a pain to go out right now, but since we don't have much to do until later this evening, how about I show you around the neighborhood?
Ethan shrugged.
Might as well.
Nice, come on.
Terrell turned off the TV and grabbed a pair of sunglasses from the table before he led Ethan out of the room.
You got another pair.
Oh, these bad boys? Not as cool as these, but I got some. Give me a second.
Saying that, Terrell ran upstairs with surprising speed. It didn't take him long before he returned with another pair of sunglasses, which he passed to Ethan. The pair then left the house. Terrell walked down the stairs with a spring in his steps.
Behold, isn't she a beauty?
He asked while gesturing to an old black muscle car. Ethan wasn't much of a car guy, but he had to admit it did look cool.
She is.
He nodded.
I know, right? Though Clara doesn't seem to appreciate her beauty.
Terrell clicked his tongue as he moved to the driver's side.
Hop in.
After getting inside, the car sprang to life as Terrell drove away from the house.
So tell me, how does it feel like?
How does what feel like?
Well, technically, it's your first free day as one of the ever-living.
Ethan shook his head.
I don't know. It feels almost the same.
Really?
Yeah.
You know, most people usually have a mental breakdown right about now.
Ethan shrugged.
Like I said, I don't know. It doesn't feel real, I guess.
Ah, now that's dangerous, my friend.
Ethan stuck his hand out of the car, enjoying the late morning breeze before asking,
Dangerous how?
Well, that thought process, or lack of it, will have you putting yourself in some dangerous positions. That's how.
Ethan subconsciously nodded, his mind recalling his meeting with the council members. He did act quite fearless. Thankfully, he got lucky.
Our condition, as some may call it, comes with a lot of perks. It does, however, also have its disadvantages. We are not alive, but nor are we dead. Our feelings and emotions will slip away.
Terrell turned to look at Ethan as they stopped at a red light.
You can't let that happen.
He said, his face solemn.
If you do, you'll turn into a husk. And then, what's the point of eternal life?
When the light turned green, Terrell looked away and laughed.
Ah, well, what I'm saying is, just find yourself a hobby and keep yourself occupied.
Ethan didn't reply, but his mind was in turmoil. Turning into a vampire still seemed unreal to talk about. No, it should feel unreal, but he didn't seem to care as much as he should. Was this what Terrell meant? Did everyone feel this way?
Don't think too much about it, man. You'll get used to it. It's different for everyone. Just keep that in mind, all right?
Ethan nodded. Yeah.
Good. Now you see that building right there?
Ethan glanced to his right and saw a tall, familiar skyscraper.
Yeah, that's where the council is, right?
Correct. That's the center of power in this city. By day, it's a normal company. By night, it's where all council members will gather to discuss their matters.
I see. How many members are there?
Too many to count. All of the main clans are officially part of the council.
So, all vampires?
Terrell shook his head as they drove off.
Not all. There are some who disagree with the way the council does things. Rogues, they call them. It's a gathering of outcast vampires from different clans. Usually you'll find them in the lower ends of town. Between me and you, they are really the council's fuck-up.
How come?
Well, those up there.
Terrell motioned to the top of the skyscraper, still visible from the window, before he continued.
They underestimated these outcasts. When they finally tried to do something about them, their numbers had grown too large. So now the two sides are in a shaky, non-aggression pact, as long as they don't overstep their boundaries.
So the council controls downtown, while these rogues are in the outskirts.
Oh, you catch on quickly. I like that. Yes, to put it simply. Although I wouldn't say they control all of the outskirts. That's where some of the dogs are, after all.
Dogs?
The werewolves.
Terrell replied in a surly tone.
You really don't like them, huh?
Fuck no.
The car ride continued silently for a few minutes before Ethan glanced at Terrell and asked,
How long has it been for you?
Terrell raised a questioning brow.
I mean, since you turned.
Ah, that. Not too long. 50-odd years?
50?
Surprised, Ethan couldn't help but ask again. Terrell chuckled.
Hey, I'll let you know I'm still rather young, especially compared to that grandma.
Clara?
Ha, of course, her. Who else? I'm sure she's been around since the 1800s. Don't tell her I told you that, though, okay?
Ethan subconsciously nodded. However, he couldn't help but do a double-take as he looked at Terrell, almost as if it was the first time he saw the man. If his words were true, the young man before him was in his 70s or 80s. Guess you can't judge a vampire by its looks, huh? Chapter 9. The Borders. The car ride continued in silence. The clouds rolled in, covering the sun, making it more comfortable for the duo. Terrell drummed his fingers on the steering wheel along with the beats of the radio song. Ethan, on the other hand, was lost in his thoughts. His mind wandered to his so-called master. Terrell broke the silence as he pointed to a tattoo parlor.
See that?
Yeah.
That belongs to a witch.
Ethan raised his brow and turned to Terrell.
Werewolves, and now witches in tattoo parlors. It feels like you're fucking with me.
Terrell laughed heartily and said,
No, I'm serious. She makes some mean potions, so I'd stay on her good side if I were you.
Are we going in?
Ethan asked.
Maybe another day.
Terrell answered as he drove off.
So witches.
Ethan couldn't help but ask again.
Yep,
Like with magic and stuff.
kind of, yes.
How does that work?
Terrell scratched his chin in contemplation.
Think of them as magical hippies.
Ha.
Ethan chuckled.
They stay in tune with nature. They do some weird rituals with all sorts of herbs. Yeah, hippies.
And what do they have to do with us?
We stay out of their business, and they stay out of ours.
I see. So you are telling me all sorts of weird magical creatures and monsters live with us, and no one has ever noticed.
Correction. You are now one of said magical monsters, and most of the human populace don't know. It's to everyone's benefit for it to stay that way. Now their higher-ups, on the other hand, are well aware of our existence.
They do.
Of course, humans aren't stupid. Do you think we can remain hidden this long without anyone knowing? Of course not. There are always some slip-ups. The council can try to cover our tracks, but that doesn't always work. Some humans are okay with working with us, others not so much.
Terrell turned to look at Ethan as they stopped at another light.
There is one thing everyone agrees on, however, and that's to keep the public in the dark.
So it's an open secret.
Terrell shrugged.
If you are high enough, then everything is
Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The duo departed from downtown as Terrell drove them toward a rough area. Ethan looked out of the window as they passed by dozens of homeless people, beggars, and street workers. If this place looked like this during the day, he wondered how it was at night. The distant sound of gunshots brought his attention back to the other side of the road, where a car sped out of an alley and swerved into the main road. Terrell remained calm, happily humming along to the song. It seemed he was familiar with such a scene.
Where are we?
Ethan asked.
The borders. Welcome to Ironwood.
Terrell grinned.
Is this rogue territory?
Close. This is neutral ground.
Neutral ground. So nobody controls this place.
Ethan asked. Terrell nodded.
You can think of this place as a no man's land. Behind us is the council's territory, and up ahead are the rogues.
I see. What are we doing here?
I need to pick up some stuff for tonight.
Terrell grinned. Ethan nodded and stared out the window as Terrell drove deeper into the neighborhood. The car pulled up next to an old mechanic shop. The street was mostly deserted as Terrell stepped out of the vehicle. Ethan took that as a cue to follow behind.
Archie?
Terrell nodded at the old man sitting in the chair.
She's in the back.
The old man replied, yawning. He barely glanced at Ethan as they entered. The shop was quiet, not what Ethan had expected a mechanic's place to look like. An old car was parked in the middle with the hood popped, but there was no one there. Terrell walked to the back and paused in front of an old, dilapidated door. He knocked once and opened it. Ethan followed right behind him. A woman with brown hair sat behind a desk. Ethan raised his brow as he observed her bulging muscles. She is a lady, right? He wondered inwardly. The Wonder Woman raised her eyes from the document she was reading and squinted as she looked at Terrell.
You're late,
She said, her voice surprisingly high-pitched for her frame.
Traffic.
Terrell answered as he pulled a chair for himself. Ethan scanned the dimly lit room filled with books and documents. Some were sprawled on the floor, while most were neatly arranged on her desk. Her gaze moved from Terrell and fell on Ethan.
And who the fuck are you?
Ethan was caught off guard by her attitude. Fortunately, Terrell intervened before he could respond.
He's with me, Nora. I would watch the tone if I were you. Otherwise, even I won't be able to help you.
Nora's frown deepened as she eyed Ethan up and down.
Whatever. Let's just get this over with.
She said and stood up.
Are you keeping everything here?
Terrell asked. She nodded and brushed past Ethan, making her way out of the room.
Who is she?
Ethan turned to Terrell and asked,
A dealer. Come. You'll see.
Archie, move the damn thing already.
Nora stopped in front of the old car and yelled. Moments later, the ground began to shift, and the entire car was lifted, revealing a hidden cabinet beneath the surface. Terrell whistled as he looked at the neatly displayed guns. There were 3 that looked like military-grade assault rifles, along with 4 pistols.
Did I ever tell you how much I love you, Nora?
Spare me. Just get your shit and leave.
Yes, yes.
Terrell grinned as he closed the large box containing all the guns and easily lifted it onto his back.
As always, send the bill to the council.
Nora waved them off.
Archie, close it.
Come on, time to go.
Ethan nodded and followed him out of the shop. The old man was gone when they left. Terrell placed the box in the back seat since it was too large to fit in the trunk. As they settled into the car, he cast an inquisitive glance at Terrell, curiosity dancing in his eyes.
It's for work.
He grinned.
I didn't think vampires needed guns.
Well, they certainly make some things easier, you know.
Can you kill a vampire with one?
With enough bullets, absolutely you can.
Terrell replied with a spark of excitement in his eyes.
But these aren't for fending off vampires. No, they're just a precaution. An extra layer of safety in case any cheeky dogs decide to crash our little gathering.
What about bullets? I didn't see you get any.
We got some back in the house, so we're good.
The drive back to the house was uneventful. It was almost evening when they arrived. Clara was already awake and sitting in the kitchen, holding a glass cup filled with a tempting red liquid. Ethan's dead heart skipped a non-existent beat as he looked at it,
Oh, welcome back.
she said as she raised her eyes from her phone. Terrell groaned as he moved the heavy box into the house and dropped it with a thud.
Tonight should be fun.
He said.
We'll see.
Clara said as she quickly downed her drink in one gulp. Her eyes turned to Ethan.
How did you sleep?
Ethan nodded.
It was okay. Thank you.
Clara nodded in satisfaction.
I'm not sure what Terrell told you, but tonight we go to take care of a few younglings that stepped out of line.
Rogues?
Ethan asked.
Yes, they hold themselves up in a warehouse close by and have been terrorizing the place.
Clara approached the box full of guns and grabbed one of the pistols.
Do you know how to use a gun?
I wouldn't say I'm very good at it.
Ethan said, shaking his head.
That's fine, just hold on to this one. Use it only if necessary, specifically for the werewolves.
Got it.
Clara and Terrell then retreated to their rooms, changed clothes, and gathered the ammunition. Ethan still found it quite surprising that werewolves were actually weak to silver. I guess there is some truth to the myths, he inwardly noted. Chapter 10. Warehouse. Night descended on the city. Ethan could feel his senses sharpening as the sun went down, and the beast inside threatened to go out. For now, he still had control. How long would that last, however? He wasn't sure. The trio gathered at the entrance. Terrell wore a long, dark brown trench coat, and Ethan spotted the muzzle of a machine gun hidden beneath it. Clara was dressed in all black and wore a thick leather jacket. Ethan was dressed casually. His clothes had been lost along with his apartment, so he borrowed some from Terrell. A simple jacket with a black hoodie underneath and a pair of loose jeans. They were easy to move in.
We're taking my car.
Terrell spoke. Clara seized him by the collar just as he reached for his keys.
Absolutely fucking not. That piece of junk wouldn't survive 2 bullets.
How dare you?
Terrell pretended to be hurt.
But then again, I don't want anyone shooting at my baby, so fine.
Clara rolled her eyes and opened the door. Terrell followed right after her with Ethan in the back. She reached out for the car keys in her pockets and unlocked the black SUV parked on the other side of the street.
Shotgun?
Terrell rushed ahead, causing Clara to roll her eyes.
I can't believe I got stuck with him.
She mumbled in annoyance. Ethan chuckled and jumped into the back seat, readjusting the pistol on his belt as it felt uncomfortable. Clara drove off as the car came to life. The neighborhood was empty, with only a few passers-by. Clara then turned on the radio, and as classical music began to play, Terrell rolled his eyes.
Oh, come on. At least put on something nicer, would you?
She ignored him and glanced in the mirror, locking eyes with Ethan.
When we get there, you can stay in the back while this idiot and I handle everything. If anyone gets past us, you can take care of them, okay?
Ethan nodded. Okay.
Oh, and no eating vampires, remember?
Terrell jumped in.
Yes, that as well.
I won't.
Great. Clara smiled and raised the music's volume, causing Terrell to groan. Sitting in the back, Ethan leaned against the tinted windows and observed the people walking by. He was different now. Most would call him a monster, but he didn't mind. He lowered his gaze to his hands. They looked paler than before, but he could feel the strength they possessed. It felt great. Life in the past few years has felt meaningless. Perhaps that's why he took this change in stride. Would things have been different if his parents were still alive? Would he have managed to finish college? Maybe find someone? Get a normal job? A small sigh escaped his lips as he shook away such thoughts. It was pointless to think about that now. There were no what-ifs in life after all. Clara and Terrell's conversation brought his mind back to the present. The two were engaged in a lively argument about who had the best taste in music. It was strange. Just 2 days ago, they were at each other's throats, and now he was sitting with them, preparing to confront some rogue vampires. Another sigh as he found himself thinking over meaningless stuff. Was he still able to eat normal food? If not, then did that mean no more pizza? No more burgers? That sounded like true horror. The drive continued with the duo bickering in the front, while Ethan sat lost in his thoughts in the back seat. It wasn't until they reached the borders that he straightened his back. Ironwood at night felt different from during the day. It was much more chaotic. The sound of gunfire never ceased. It resembled a war zone. Where are the police? Ethan found himself wondering. This area did not appear to be governed by the laws of civilization. No, it was lawless. Clara and Terrell, however, remained unbothered. Rightfully so, Ethan thought. In this place, they were the true monsters, not the gangsters or hooligans roaming the streets. Still, there were always those that did not value their lives. As soon as their car stopped at a traffic light, a couple of masked men rushed from an alley with guns drawn. They immediately tried to open the doors to their car, but failed. Ethan could hear their muffled curses and shouts as they demanded they open the door, or else they'd shoot. Clara casually picked up the pistol at her side and lowered both windows. 2 exceptionally fast and precise shots were all it took, and the would-be robbers took the room temperature challenge. Ethan raised an eyebrow in surprise. The men were positioned near the doors. The moment she lowered the windows, they pounced, but not before she got them. Terrell didn't bat an eye. Instead, he was busy looking at his phone. Was this an everyday occurrence in Ironwood? The light turned green, and their car drove away, leaving behind 2 dead bodies in the street. Although he had never been to this part of town before his incident, Ethan never imagined that the situation could be this bad.
This is what happens when you have no law.
As if reading his mind, Clara spoke.
What about the cops?
Terrell chuckled at his question, but did not raise his head from his phone.
They don't come down here at night.
Clara shook her head.
It's crazy,
Ethan answered.
It is, and that's what makes it dangerous.
The drive continued in silence as Clara turned into a back alley. Their surroundings became dark and desolate, but Ethan remained calm. The night was comforting. If anything, he felt at home.
We've arrived,
Clara said as she parked beside a large warehouse. Terrell stretched and grabbed his rifle. Clara checked her gun as well and turned to look at Ethan.
Ready?
Ready,
He replied.
Let's move.
The back street was surprisingly quiet given the chaos they had just experienced. Ethan surveyed his surroundings, noticing the absence of any humans. He then shifted his gaze to the warehouse as he followed behind Clara and Terrell. The duo wore serious expressions, completely devoid of their earlier childishness. Terrell led the way, with Clara a step behind to his left, while Ethan trailed slightly behind on the right. He raised his hand and knocked on the large metal door, the sound breaking the unsettling silence.
Aren't you afraid whoever is in there will escape?
Ethan couldn't help but ask.
This is the only entrance. If they want to escape, they have to go out from here unless there is a shapeshifter amongst them who can fly. But according to our information, there isn't.
Clara calmly explained. Ethan nodded in understanding. Terrell raised his hand and knocked again, the sound echoing across the street. But still, there was no response.
I guess it's the hard way.
He cracked his neck and muttered. Ethan's eyes widened with curiosity as Terrell inhaled deeply. With a fierce expression, he clenched his fist and unleashed a powerful blow against the colossal metal door. The sound echoed like thunder as the door crumbled inward, sending a cloud of dust spiraling into the air. Bullets followed almost immediately. Chapter 11. The Warehouse 2. Ethan's body reacted instinctively before his mind could fully grasp the situation. Terrell and Clara dove for cover as bullets began to rain down on their location. It felt like they had been anticipated. After all, Terrell had practically announced their arrival, almost inviting the gunfire. Now was not the time for such thoughts. Terrell stood by his side with a slight frown on his face, while Clara stood on the other side.
Idiot!
She mouthed at him, her voice drowned out by the sound of gunfire. Terrell flashed Clara a defiant grin and raised his middle finger before pulling a machine gun from beneath his trench coat. Slinging it over his shoulder, his eyes glowed with a bright golden light. He held up 3 fingers, signaling Clara to get ready. She nodded.
3, 2, 1.
As soon as Terrell's last finger dropped, the gunfire ceased abruptly, almost as if on cue. Without missing a beat, the duo sprang into action, moving with synchronized precision. Ethan jumped into the warehouse right after them. A few cars were parked near the entrance, and several vampires were hiding behind them. A quick glance toward the back revealed a couple more positioned on the second floor, aiming at the entrance. Their eyes widened as they hurried to reload. It was too late. Terrell moved like an unstoppable force. He drew a familiar dagger from his waist and lunged forward like a shadow. His speed overwhelmed the vampires, and his dagger sliced through the air, decapitating the first vampire before he swiftly turned toward the second, not missing a beat. Clara ascended to the second floor with fluid grace. She sprang onto a car, using it as a springboard to propel herself upward. A vampire, quick on the reload, fired a shot, but Clara evaded it with ease. Her fist connected with the vampire's stomach, forcing him to his knees. With a swift, powerful twist, she snapped his neck, his head coming off with a sickening crunch. She then continued and took care of the other one as well. Ethan watched the massacre unfold before him in surprise. The duo was powerful. This meant he had to readjust his power ranking in this new world. All of the vampires inside the warehouse seemed to be golds. Were they the most common? Still, for Terrell and Clara to bulldoze through them like that was a testimony to their strength. That meant that Ethan was even stronger than he thought. He did fight and beat them along with a dozen others as well, after all. Albeit his recollection of the encounter was somewhat hazy. Just as he was thinking of that, one of the vampires, a woman with short brown hair and golden eyes, retreated in fear towards him.
Move!
She roared, aiming her claws at his neck. Ethan watched her attack with a detached calm as if time had slowed. With a smooth sidestep, he avoided her strike and delivered a precise blow to her neck. Her body was hurled backward, crashing violently into one of the cars. Terrell paused his attack momentarily and glanced his way, a shiver running down his spine before shaking his head and moving to finish off the rest. Ethan glanced at his hand in curiosity. He was still not used to the amount of power he wielded. He needed to learn to control that. Seeing what had happened to their companion, no other vampire dared to move in his direction. Ethan didn't bother pursuing them either. Instead, he observed Terrell and Clara with interest. Clara seemed to be physically stronger than Terrell. Why was that? Was it due to age? The older the vampire, the stronger they became? Or was it related to the amount of blood or strength inherited from their masters? Terrell didn't have any claws extending from his fingers. Instead, he chose to use his dagger as he deftly maneuvered through the vampires. Clara, on the other hand, carried no weapon except for her hands, or rather her claws. Her strength was astonishing. Just one hit was enough to decapitate a vampire. It didn't take long for the sound of fighting to cease. Ethan wondered what the point of bringing guns was in the first place. Ah, they said they are meant for the werewolves.
That wasn't so bad.
Terrell stretched as he sat on top of one of the cars, a dozen dead vampires at his feet.
You missed one, and Ethan had to take care of her.
Clara replied as she jumped off the second floor, a vampire's head in her hand. She looked at the head with a frown before tossing it to the ground.
I didn't miss one. I just wanted him to get a little bit of action.
Terrell replied with a smile.
Stop messing around and call for the cleanup.
Why is it always me?
Terrell complained as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number.
How was it?
Clara asked Ethan as she approached him.
I didn't do anything. It was all you guys.
Clara nodded.
Yes, you still need to get used to your body first. Did it speak to you?
She asked. Ethan shook his head.
No, I'm good.
Clara, visibly relieved, nodded.
Great, let's get out of here then. It's time to teach you how to...
Her words trailed off as a serious expression overtook her face. Ethan turned to face the warehouse entrance as he sensed a few unfamiliar auras. They didn't seem like vampires, nor humans.
Werewolves.
Clara frowned. Terrell moved with unprecedented speed, his body a blur as he reappeared next to them.
Damn dogs!
He cursed. Just then, the newcomers entered the warehouse. There were 3 of them, and the man in front was exceptionally tall. His muscles were clearly defined, even beneath the business suit he wore. He had a neatly trimmed black beard, and his dark hair was slicked back. Next to him stood a dark-skinned woman in a tracksuit, sporting an athletic build and short hair. The final man looked like he belonged to a biker gang. Long, unkempt beard, a black bandana, a leather jacket, and dark sunglasses.
Took the wrong turn, dogs?
Terrell grinned, his fangs making him look quite sinister.
Better watch your mouth, leech. This is no council grant.
The biker gang guy shot back. Terrell moved to grab his machine gun, but Clara raised her hand to stop him.
What are you doing here, Duke?
Clara asked.
I could ask the same of you, Clara.
The tall man in the business suit replied.
Council business.
Duke surveyed the dozen lifeless vampires and nodded in approval. When his gaze met Ethan's, a flicker of surprise crossed his face.
I thought you don't do greys.
None of your business, dog. Fuck off on your merry way. The more I look at you, the more pissed I get.
Terrell interrupted, causing Duke to frown.
Come on, do something. I dare you. I double fucking dare you.
Terrell, enough.
Tisk.
This fucking leech. Why are we just standing here? Just let me rip the bastard, Duke.
Terrell grinned mockingly, waving his hand.
Oh, look at the little doggy here. Do you need your master's permission for everything? Even to take a shit? Come on, fetch this.
Damn it, Terrell, enough.
Clara frowned. Duke glanced at Ethan one final time before speaking.
Peace treaty or not, you'd do best keeping this one under control. The tribes will not take kindly to any of your kind making their way to our lands.
They were not under council rule.
Clara replied calmly.
The council does not wish for war, but that doesn't mean we fear it, Duke. We've already taken care of them, so this conversation is meaningless.
Duke harumphed and glanced at Ethan before turning to leave. Terrell flicked his finger at them, prompting the biker gang member to curse as they walked away.
Come on, we're leaving as well.
Clara said. Chapter 12. Feeding.
What was that?
Ethan asked as the trio made their way back to the car.
You mean the dogs?
Terrell asked.
Yes, the werewolves.
That was Duke and his followers. He's the leader of one of their tribes.
Clara replied as she drove the car away.
Is he strong?
Ethan couldn't help but ask. Clara hesitated for a bit before nodding.
He is.
Terrell scoffed, but didn't refute her words. Interesting. Just how strong was a werewolf compared to him?
Compared to me, who is stronger?
You'd win, but would probably sustain some damage.
Clara answered calmly. Ethan frowned. That meant this Duke fellow was stronger than both Clara and Terrell.
Then what about the two that were with him?
Just lousy dogs, especially that nasty bastard James. You should have let me at him, Clara.
We were outnumbered, and what is the point of starting a meaningless fight? You'd do best to control that temper of yours, Terrell. Times have changed. The council wants peace.
Terrell sneered.
Peace? How ridiculous.
What's wrong with peace?
Ethan asked as he leaned forward.
Huh? What's wrong is that those bastards are a bunch of savages. There is no peace with them.
Clara sighed and shook her head.
You should know damn well that I'm right, Clara. This whole piece with the dogs is a ticking time bomb. Mark my words.
Another sigh escaped Clara's mouth as she suddenly stopped the car next to the sidewalk.
How about you go take a walk and clear your mind? I'll take Ethan to hunt.
Terrell harumphed and opened the door. Fine. Ethan watched him leave in confusion and turned to glance at Clara.
Why don't jump in the front seat?
Ethan nodded and opened the door, scanning his surroundings. Terrell had already vanished. That was fast. Ethan hadn't even seen him leave. Once inside the car, Clara drove off.
He really hates werewolves, huh?
Hate is an understatement.
Did something happen to him?
Clara hesitated for a second before she nodded.
He lost someone dear to him to a werewolf.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yes, it's not my story to tell, but I do understand where his hatred is coming from.
Ethan nodded.
What about you?
Me?
Yes, you don't seem to hate them as much.
I suppose I don't.
Clara shrugged.
It's nothing personal. I'd prefer not to fight them, but if the council or their tribes start a war, I'll have to join.
So basically going with the flow. I get it.
Something like that. War is meaningless, if you ask me.
The duo continued their conversation as Clara led them out of Ironwood and back into council territory. The night was still young. Ethan lowered the window and enjoyed the cool breeze. It was cold, but still refreshing.
I just remembered. I have a weird question.
Clara glanced at him.
What is it?
Can I still eat normal food? I mean, like a pizza or a burger.
Her eyes softened with pity.
Oh dear, I'm sorry.
Seriously. Fuck, that sucks.
On a brighter note, blood is tastier than anything you've ever tried. I can guarantee that.
Is that so? But then again, what's the point when you say I only feed once in a while?
You'll understand.
The car soon stopped in a bustling district filled with clubs and bars. This part of town was livelier than most, with people walking in and out of bars, and a few standing by the sidewalks, smoking and chatting despite the cold weather.
It's here.
Ethan asked in surprise.
You've been here before?
Ethan nodded.
This is where I met that crazy my crazy master.
Oh, this area is part of the council's feeding grounds.
I see. I didn't think I would be back here so soon. Won't it be a problem if someone recognized me? I thought I was supposed to be dead after all.
No one will, don't worry. Come on.
Ethan shrugged and followed Clara out of the car. His attire wasn't exactly club appropriate, but it didn't seem to matter. Clara led him to one of the higher-end bars. They climbed the steps where a tall, heavy-set bouncer stood. The moment he saw Clara, he quickly lowered his head in respect and opened the door. Ethan followed her inside, hands in his pockets. The bar was dimly lit and sparsely populated. A few tables were scattered by the corners and windows. In the middle was an empty dance floor. Well, mostly empty, except for a drunk woman dancing by herself. Clara led him to the counter, where the bartender, a man with bright blue eyes, smiled as they approached.
Clara, a pleasure to see you.
The bartender greeted with a warm smile. Ethan could tell almost immediately that the man was a vampire. His bright eyes marked him as a blue, which meant mental powers. Ethan pondered this with curiosity.
Julian?
Clara smiled back. The bartender turned to Ethan with a nod.
And you must be the man of the hour. Julien, a pleasure to meet you,
he said, extending his hand. Ethan shook it and replied,
Ethan, nice to meet you.
Julian's eyes gleamed with a bright blue light for a second before he looked at Clara.
The same as usual.
Nobody's upstairs?
No one, you're in luck.
Great, then we'll go ahead and get settled first.
With that, Clara led Ethan to the second floor. A few sofas were neatly arranged, overlooking the ground floor. The space was empty, giving them the entire place to themselves.
So this place also belongs to the council?
Ethan asked.
Yes, along with most of the clubs and bars in this area.
So the way you feed is on drunk people?
Ethan raised his brow.
Not necessarily. Come, let's sit down first.
Once they settled, Clara continued.
I'm sure you've heard the stories about how vampires can charm people and so on.
Ethan nodded and motioned for her to continue.
There is some truth to that. Though some are more proficient than others, especially the blues, almost all vampires can exert a certain amount of hypnosis on mortals. That makes it easier for us to feed.
I see.
Just then, a young man walked upstairs, looking slightly confused. He seemed to be a university student, likely out partying with his friends.
Watch?
Clara said, turning her gaze to the young man.
Sorry,
His words were abruptly cut off as he stared into Clara's eyes.
Come to me,
she commanded. The young man's eyes glazed over as he obediently walked towards her.
Sit,
she spoke, and he complied. Clara moved slowly, her fangs elongating as she sank them into the young man's neck. He remained still, his expression resembling that of a drunk person. After drinking for a moment, Clara pulled back, licking her lips before turning to Ethan.
Leave,
she whispered, and the young man suddenly stood up and walked away with a dazed look. As he watched him go, Ethan couldn't help but ask,
Is that okay?
As long as you don't suck them dry, then there is no problem.
I mean, wouldn't he remember what just happened?
Clara shook her head.
As long as it's not a traumatic experience, then no.
So, all vampires can do this?
Yes, but like I said, blues are the best at it. For us to hypnotize anyone, they must first lock eyes with us. For a blue, however, they don't need such a thing. So what do you think? Want to give it a try?
I'll be lying if I said I wasn't curious.
Chapter 13. Feeding 2.
All right, let's start with someone easy.
Ethan turned to Clara and asked,
Easy.
Yes. Since it's your first time, you might find it hard with someone who has all their mental defenses up.
Clara touched her lip with a thoughtful look before she stood up.
Come?
Ethan followed her as they made their way to the railing overlooking the first floor.
Yes, she'll do.
She said, and gestured to the lone drunk lady dancing in the middle of the floor.
Her?
Yes.
So that's what you meant by not having their mental defenses up.
Clara smiled.
It'll help.
Ethan shrugged.
So how do I do this?
Like I said, hold eye contact, get close to her, and command her. You can bring her back up here.
Ethan nodded before taking a deep breath and heading downstairs. Thankfully, the bar was still empty, with only a few patrons present. His eyes met the bartender, Julian, who gave him a knowing smile and nod. Ethan then turned his gaze to his target. She was still busy dancing with her back to him. He waited until she turned around before he made his way toward her. Ethan's mind came up with countless plans for approaching her. The second their eyes met, Ethan's body moved before he could realize it. With a flirty smile, he made sure the lady could see him as he approached. She swayed to an imagined rhythm, her movements unsteady and slightly exaggerated. Her eyes were half closed, a blissful smile playing on her lips as she spun slowly, arms loosely outstretched. Her clothes were slightly disheveled, hinting at the late hour and the drinks that had likely loosened her inhibitions. The dim, multicolored lights cast shifting shadows around her as Ethan approached.
You're cute.
The lady spoke with a drunken grin as she threw her hands around Ethan's neck. It was too easy. Ethan didn't need to say anything. He just smiled back and maintained eye contact as they swayed unsteadily to the rhythm of the music, the drinks doing most of the job. The lady had short brown hair and hazel eyes. Still, Ethan didn't pay any heed to her appearance. His mind was occupied by a rhythmic sound. It took him a second to realize it was her heartbeat he was hearing. Ethan could feel his fangs elongated in his mouth as a sudden urge threatened to overwhelm him. A feeling of hunger unlike any assaulted him. He almost missed a step as the drunken lady tumbled into his chest, the smell overwhelming his senses. It was as if his body had a selective sense of smell. It ignored the smell of alcohol, the smell of cheap perfume, and sweat. Instead, it only focused on a particular one so sweet. It was more intoxicating than any drink, more addicting than any drug. Ethan almost lost his composure right then and there. He had to physically stop himself from pouncing on the drunk lady. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands shaking as his stomach protested. His throat felt parched the longer he looked at the woman in his arms. Still, Ethan used every ounce of his strength to restrain himself. It didn't help that the intoxicated woman was dancing dangerously close to him, her neck just inches away. It felt akin to torture. Knowing he would soon lose control, Ethan gently took the woman's chin and made her lock eyes with him.
Come with me.
The order came as naturally as breathing. It felt as if they were connected by an invisible thread as they locked eyes. That was all Ethan needed. The woman's eyes became hazy as Ethan took her hand and led her upstairs. She followed silently behind him. Once on the second floor, Clara watched them arrive with an impressed expression on her face.
Not bad. I'm surprised you could still hold yourself back.
Ethan didn't hear her speak. Instead, he turned to his prey. His hand gripped her shoulder firmly, his strength far greater than he realized. He pushed her against the soft embrace of the sofa, his breath quickening as a fire ignited in his chest. His mouth opened wide, his gums aching as his sharp, gleaming fangs extended. The tips caught the light for a fleeting second before plunging into her flesh. The moment his teeth broke the surface, time itself seemed to shatter. Warm, thick, crimson life burst onto his tongue. A flood of ecstasy unlike anything he had ever known. It was fire and silk, sweet and salty, rich with vitality. The taste bloomed in layers, first coppery and metallic, then smooth like dark wine infused with 1,000 forbidden pleasures. It was the very essence of being. each pulse of her heartbeat pushing more of it into his mouth, into him. The rush hit him like a storm. His senses exploded outward. He could feel the heat of her body radiating through his skin, hear the delicate flutter of her breath, smell the perfume mingled with desire. His veins surged with power, every cell alive and humming. Colors grew brighter behind his closed eyelids, the world an explosion of sensations. His mind reeled, caught between pleasure and hunger. It wasn't just nourishment, it was a baptism, a rebirth in blood, a connection so intimate it fused their beings together in a fleeting, feverish moment. Ethan could taste her secrets, her memories whispering on the edge of his consciousness, each drop a fragment of her soul. It wasn't until Clara forcefully pulled away that his chest heaved with exhilaration, and his heart, silent and still, seemed to echo with a phantom beat. Blood, warm and red, trickled down his prey's neck. He had fed, and it was glorious.
Calm yourself any more and you would kill the poor lady.
Ethan glared at Clara, his eyes darting back to the woman on the sofa. Her eyes closed and her breath steady. The taste was dangerous. Ethan leaned back and stared at the ceiling, basking in the afterglow of what had just happened. It was better than any food, any drink, any drug. No matter how he described it, it still felt lacking. He could sense the strength flowing through his cells. He felt invincible at the moment. A part of him, a large part, wished nothing but to suck the woman dry. It felt as if Clara had taken away something important from him, and he couldn't help but feel resentful. Ethan turned to glare at her. Clara chuckled in response.
Don't look at me like that. You have to learn to control yourself. Drink in moderation.
She glanced at the woman, who now had her eyes half open, and said,
Go back home, dear.
The woman, still nameless to Ethan, wobbled unsteadily as she pushed herself up from the sofa. Her disheveled hair framed her flushed cheeks, and the faint line of crimson on her neck glimmered like a forbidden mark. She lingered for a breathless second, her glassy eyes unfocused before she stumbled toward the stairs. Ethan watched her go, his eyes following her every wavering step. A strange, unwelcome pull twisted in his chest, a reluctant longing he didn't fully understand. His fingers still tingled where they had held her. His lips still burned from the taste of her life on his tongue.
Don't dwell on it. You'll learn not to get affected by it with time.
As her figure disappeared, the silence stretched thin and sharp. Ethan sank back against the sofa, his hand brushing against the cushion where she had sat. He stared at his palm, as though it could still hold the fleeting connection that had slipped through his grasp. The memory of her pulse throbbed in his mind. Ethan understood that feeding was far more than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just survival, it was possession. It was intimacy. It was a brief, impossible taste of the very soul of another being, and it left him craving more. Chapter 14. Back home.
Are you all right?
Clara asked as she settled beside Ethan, her eyes searching his face. Ethan lay back, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. He absent-mindedly nodded, still lingering in the afterglow of his earlier feeding session.
Can you hear it?
Clara ventured, a hint of nervousness threading through her question. Ethan turned his gaze toward her, shaking his head slowly.
No, it's quiet.
Clara visibly relaxed, a sigh escaping her lips.
That's good. Well, I think that should be enough excitement for one night. Shall we head out?
With a groan, Ethan forced himself upright.
Yeah, let's go.
The two of them made their way downstairs, the dance floor now eerily still. Ethan's gaze flickered back to the empty space for a moment before he followed Clara to the bar. Julian greeted them with an inviting smile.
I hope everything was to your satisfaction.
It was. Thank you, Julian.
Clara returned the smile, placing a golden coin on the counter. Julian's grin widened as he deftly pocketed the coin.
Oh, you didn't need to do that.
Clara simply nodded, already turning to leave. Ethan frowned, curiosity peaking within him as he caught up to her outside the bar. Without missing a beat, she reached into her coat and retrieved another golden coin, offering it to him.
What's this?
He asked, surprised.
That
Clara explained.
is how we trade favors in our world. Money talks, but for the ever-living, it carries even greater weight.
Ethan rolled the coin between his fingers, feeling its cold surface. One side displayed an intricately carved crown, while the other depicted a fierce dagger. It felt foreign, yet familiar at the same time, a symbol of a world he was just beginning to understand.
That coin's value cannot be compared to regular money.
Clara continued.
Where can you even get it from?
Ethan asked as he handed the coin back.
Like I said, favors.
Clara smiled enigmatically. Ethan frowned, but nodded nonetheless. He handed the coin back to Clara, who shook her head with an uncharacteristic grin.
You can keep it, of course, for a future favor.
Ethan raised an eyebrow as he glanced at the coin once more. A part of him suspected that things weren't as simple as that, but curiosity got the best of him. After a brief moment of hesitation, he nodded.
All right.
Clara's smile widened as she led the way back to the car.
What about Terrell?
Ethan asked as he glanced around the street, still busy with people going in and out of the clubs and bars. Clara shook her head.
He'll find his way back home.
Asterisk, asterisk. The drive back was silent. Clara's fingers rhythmically tapped on the steering wheel to the sound of classical music, while Ethan stared out the window, his mind occupied with thoughts of his future feed. He didn't notice when they arrived back home. There was no parking spot available, causing Clara to mutter a soft curse as she circled the block a few times before finding one a short distance from the house. As the duo walked to the house, Ethan couldn't help but ask,
Say, Clara?
Hmm?
Any news on my crazy master?
Clara froze for a second before shaking her head.
You have to be patient, Ethan. None of us is in any position to follow the movements of a red...
A sigh escaped Ethan's lips.
I know. I just have a lot I want to ask her.
Clara gave him a gentle smile in response.
And you'll get your chance. For now, focus on mastering your abilities and getting used to everything first. After all you have now is time.
Ethan absent-mindedly nodded as they climbed the stairs and entered the house. Clara unlocked the door while he followed closely behind her. There was still no sign of Terrell, so Ethan assumed he would return later.
Before I forget.
Clara said, making her way to one of the drawers by the entrance. She pulled out a brand new phone and handed it to Ethan.
This is for you. I shouldn't have to remind you, but keep your social media presence low. You'll find both my number and Terrell's saved in there in case you ever need anything.
Ethan took the phone with a nod, replying,
Got it. Thank you.
Get some rest for now. Today's been a busy one.
She said, patting him on the shoulder before retreating to her room. Ethan watched her go for a moment before glancing at the phone in his hand. He sighed, then made his way to the living room. The game console was still on from earlier. He plopped down on the sofa, sinking back into the cushions. He wasn't tired enough to sleep yet. His gaze drifted to the controller, and after a moment he shrugged and turned on the game.
Might as well.
It didn't take long, however, before his curses were heard across the house. Clara, who was upstairs, rolled her eyes as she changed out of her clothes.
Another one.
She sighed. Asterisk, asterisk. A few hours later, the front door swung open as Terrell returned home. He raised an eyebrow in surprise when he heard Ethan's loud curses coming from the living room, and a chuckle escaped his lips. After removing his coat, he made his way to the living room. Ethan greeted him with a groan, his gaze still fixed on the TV. Terrell grinned and sat down next to him, grabbing the second controller.
Huh, make way. Let me carry you.
You?
Ethan glanced at him suspiciously.
What's with that look? You've already died again. This round is lost. Just surrender, and let's start a new one.
Fine.
Asterisk, asterisk.
You suck.
Ethan cursed.
It's not me. It's the team that's trash.
How were you unable to kill him when he had his back to you?
I panicked, okay.
Ha! Ethan dropped the controller on the sofa and leaned back, massaging his eyes.
This is our 4th loss in a row.
Ah, fuck it. I don't feel like playing anymore.
Terrell grumbled by his side.
It's already too late anyway. The sun is about to rise.
Ethan answered.
Hmm.
The duo sat in silence for a few moments, dwelling on their defeat, when Ethan glanced at Terrell and asked,
Are you all right?
Hmm? Oh, yes, I'm fine. Don't worry about me.
Terrell grinned, but Ethan could see that his eyes told a different story. Still, he didn't feel close enough to the vampire to press further. After all, they had only known each other for a couple of days. Deciding not to push, Ethan nodded and stood up to head to his room. He lightly tapped Terrell on the shoulder and said,
Good night.
Terrell appeared to be in a fog, his mind wandering elsewhere as he absent-mindedly replied,
Good night.
asterisk asterisk. Once in his room, Ethan locked the door behind him, changed his clothes, and plopped down onto the soft bed. He glanced at his phone, noting that it was 5:30 in the morning.
Another day.
He muttered, staring at the beautiful ceiling. Sleep did not come easily that night. His mind kept replaying the events of the day. The warehouse, the werewolves, the taste of blood. Ethan wasn't sure when sleep finally took him into its embrace.